Hi guys, filming a little more casually today. This is usually where I sit and read right next to the window. I'm trying to catch the last bit of daylight on the last day of 2020. I don't know when I'll be putting this up, but Happy New Year to all of you. I wanted to share that I got what I think is the best Christmas present. I can't remember loving a present more than this in a long, long time. I got Robert Alter's complete translation and commentary of the Hebrew Bible. And I don't know if I think the light might be a little too bright over here, but this is the back end of it. And oh God, it's so heavy. This is what the front looks like. This first volume is the 5 books of Moses, often called the Torah, the Pentateuch, and a number of other names. But here's the front cover. And then this is the back. This next giant volume, I think this alone is about 1,300 pages, is the Prophets. Here is the cover. And this is the back of it. Insane. When I opened the package and took these out for the first time, I gasped. So as an example of what you can find in here, you have books like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. These are the prophets we're talking about. And then the third volume in English is just called The Writings. Here's that front and the back. And as an example, I believe the book of Ruth is in here. What else? Oh, of course, Psalms, Job, Song of Songs, Daniel, Esther. Yeah, this is another. I mean, you can't go wrong with any volume in the Hebrew Bible. In Christianity, these writings are referred to as the Old Testament, but I prefer, when it makes sense, to call them the Hebrew Bible because of the long history and tradition of Christianity using the phrase New Testament, especially to mean the new and improved Testament. For those of you who aren't familiar with Robert Alter and why you might care about his full translation of the Hebrew Bible, he grew up Jewish and knew a smattering of Hebrew from his bar mitzvah and those sorts of things, but he had taught himself Hebrew to fluency, I think around the age of 20, but he originally got his degree in comparative literature and was studying a lot of the more modern great writers of the Western canon, people like Henry James, Virginia Woolf, James Joyce. These are the people that he references in his introduction to the 5 books of Moses that I've read so far. And he was doing his research and writing on these types of figures. Then he began to notice that when it came to both the translation and the critical scholarship sides of the Hebrew Bible, that people were not really thinking of these books in a really careful literary way. And he became passionate about teaching people how to view the literary workings of the Bible and the way that ancient Hebrew functioned literarily. And so in 1981, he came out with this foundational book, The Art of Biblical Narrative, which I have read and I still refer to. It's all annotated here. I would like to go back and do a full reread of this sometime soon, though, especially as I'm going through his commentary on the full translation. So, for example, one of the chapters in here is discussing the idea of contradictions in the Bible. Now, it's just littered with contradictions from book to book and within books. But Alter argues that people are too quick to assume that, especially within books, when there's contradiction, that it represents a sort of stupidity or carelessness on the part of people who wrote and compiled these texts. Whether or not they were inspired by God, I completely respect that many of you will believe that. But historically, it was a number of people who ended up putting these things together. And he is saying that actually there are literary reasons for having multiple ways of telling the same story within different parts of the Bible. And a great example is Genesis, how it starts out with the creation of man and woman together. And then the very next chapter, we get a second creation story in which man is created first, and then from his rib, woman is created. And if you don't know much about the Bible or think much about the devices within these narrative structures, then you might think, well, somebody just did a really, really poor job of editing this thing. And so in terms of contradiction and so many other things, he really, really opened my eyes to how to read these books. I remember when I was about 17, I think I had just rewatched The Prince of Egypt or something, and I sat myself down and I said, I'm going to read the book of Exodus. And I didn't know how to read it, how to interpret what was going on. I didn't understand the way that dialogue was being used. And there's such intense compression of events. There's really such a spareness to the Bible that's quite elegant in a lot of contexts, but that makes it difficult for a modern reader. Even if you have grown up with some kind of Bible study, maybe you've heard these in various places of worship, I still struggled with it. And it was through reading Robert Alter that I came to really, really love these texts. The Hebrew Bible is actually not all that large. Part of the reason these volumes are so huge in the end is that over half of many of the pages is commentary. And you might think that that could get a little tiresome, but I am finding myself energized by the way the commentary is making me view this text. And also, like a lot of you, I grew up mostly hearing and reading the King James Version. Now, Robert Alter is a big fan of the King James Version of the Bible, and I think that he said it's the most glorious English translation. But when we think about translation theory, there are the two poles of foreignizing, so that it's as close to the original language as possible, or domesticating, so that the new language is the one that gets the primary focus. And Alter and many other people would say that as fabulous a translation job as was done by the panels who translated the King James Version, that it's more on the domesticating end, that the English is treated with a lot more care and precision than the ancient Hebrew, for example, and Aramaic in certain parts of the Hebrew Bible. So, for example, the term soul, as it's understood in modern English, that doesn't really appear, that concept doesn't appear in the majority of the Hebrew Bible. And so Alter has taken that word out and found other words that are resonant in the same way, but don't have connotations that the Hebrew writers didn't actually intend. Another detail that Alter lights on in the introduction to this first volume is the idea that in English, it's far preferred to use synonyms, but in the Hebrew Bible, as it was originally written, there were such intentional repetitions of words that had many different connotations, words like seed, for example, and that you weren't meant to find synonyms for these and scatter them about to make it sound more lovely in English, that you actually lose a lot of the intentionality and the meaning behind these repeated words when you try to translate it a bit more poetically. I've only gotten through the first few chapters of Genesis, in addition to the pretty lengthy and useful introduction. Genesis, unimaginatively, is, I think, my favorite book of the Hebrew Bible. I also love Esther. I love Ruth. Job. Job is an absolute favorite of mine as well. And then individual stories within different books of the Bible. Like, I love the story of Saul. He's a character who's always fascinated me. But as I was saying, Genesis, I think, is my ultimate favorite. It has some of the most fascinating narratives that you're going to find in all of literature, let alone within this set of books. I want to give you just two examples of the way that the commentary is adding to the experience here. Very first sentence. When God began to create heaven and the earth then was welter and waste and darkness over the deep, and God's breath hovering over the waters, God said, "Let there be light." So you can already see the different rhythmic choices that Alter is making there compared to a number of other famous translations. But one of the notes is concerning the word hovering, when it says God's breath hovering over the waters. The verb attached to God's breath, wind, spirit elsewhere describes an eagle fluttering over its young, and so might have a connotation of nurture as well as rapid back and forth movement. And so you go back and reread the phrase, God's breath hovering over the waters, and suddenly you have this added image of an eagle skimming the waves, and it's just a gorgeous description. And then I'm going to read a part of the second creation story in which man was created first and then woman, again, as opposed to where they were created side by side at the same time in the first part of Genesis. So here is where Adam has already been built from the earth, and now he's being called upon to name the animals. And the human called names to all the cattle and to the fowl of the heavens and to all the beasts of the field. But for the human no sustainer beside him was found. And the Lord God cast a deep slumber on the human, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed over the flesh where it had been. And the Lord God built the rib he had taken from the human into a woman, and he brought her to the human. The part I want to focus on is, but for the human no sustainer beside him was found. Now, in the commentary below, it says that this word sustainer in the King James Version is translated as helpmeet, and that in general, this term from ancient Hebrew is notoriously difficult to translate. And Alter goes through other possibilities and why he ultimately landed on this one. And when I first read through that line, that word sustainer leapt out at me, and I thought, that's not the King James Version. I don't remember exactly what the King James Version is, but it's not that. And that word has such a profundity to it, and it feels so right in this context as well. So just little things here and there, and whether or not this is your very first time reading through the books of the Bible, or if you've read it 1,000 times and it's an integral part of your life, I think that you can get so much out of the choices that Alter is making, and the way that he reflects so much of the characteristics of ancient Hebrew in a way that you're not going to find in other translations. Another element that's empowering is, I think a lot about how people can feel insecure about the idea of literary analysis, that maybe analysis is something that some people are just superior at. Other people maybe notice things more in books, and for some reason I just am never going to notice those things. That's the tenor of a lot of comments that I used to get, especially on my review videos. And I know exactly what you mean, because I feel the same way when I watch certain other booktubers, and I think, my mind isn't as sharp as that. I'm never going to notice things the way that that person does. But what I really believe is that analysis is a muscle, and it gets so much stronger the more that you exercise it. And a lot of people on BookTube, myself included, we sharpened a lot of our analytical skills in the classroom by being with professors and other students who were, likely a lot more brilliant than we were, and seeing how their minds worked when they encountered the same books that we did. But you don't have to go to school and pay all that money and take all that time in order to practice analysis, because commentary like this is going to train your eye to notice so many things, and it's not going to feel like work. You're really, really going to enjoy it. Just enjoy the whole process of feeling these books that might otherwise seem a little flat on the page, a little dead. See them come to life when we're really getting some biblical imagery here, aren't we? It gives you the benefit of school, but at your own pace. And you get to pause over the areas of the story that really grab your attention the most. So ultimately, the best Christmas gift, this is from my parents, my parents and my sister are honestly the only people in my life who could probably even afford to have given me these editions, because I think this whole set is something like $120. So it is definitely a commitment. And if you haven't read Alter before, you can definitely find individual books or collections of books. For example, I think he has a smaller collection called Wisdom Books that includes the Book of Job and maybe 4 others. So you can sample and see if you enjoy what he has to say and how he explains reading the Bible and his choices for everything that's going on literarily. But for me, this is something that I will be returning to over the course of a lifetime. And I intend to go through a number of the most narrative and entertaining books in the next few months. And I'd like to make videos on those if you're interested, and maybe do some classic and contemporary pairings with new novels and plays and such. So let me know below. That's what I'm currently reading. Some of the most interesting, invigorating, confounding, moving stories that have ever been committed to paper. Well, scrolls originally, I guess, if you want to be technical about it. So thanks for spending this time with me and sharing my excitement in this beautiful behemoth. Oh, hey, how's it going? The baby is like sleeping down right below. Oh, she just yawned. Oh, are these books that we're definitely not going to chew? Yeah. Oh, look over here. There you are. There you are. I'm so sorry, you guys. I speak to her in the stupidest voice. You're not spelled like the biblical Lila, are you? Well, I would say that Marilyn Robinson deserves her own sort of biblical fervor. Oh, now she's using them as a throne, which I honestly respect.